The gray, frigid waters of the Danish Straits became the staging ground for an unprecedented maritime confrontation at 4 o'clock hours this morning. Beneath a low-hanging canopy of iron-colored clouds, the silence of the Baltic Sea was shattered by the rhythmic thud of rotor blades as MH-60 or Seahawk helicopters descended toward a line of 14 Russian-flagged cargo vessels. The fleet, led by the ice-class heavy-lift ship Kolmogorov, had been moving in a tight formation toward the Kaliningrad exclave before it was enveloped by a combined task force of U.S. Navy destroyers and NATO maritime patrol craft. On the decks of the cargo ships, the metallic clatter of boarding teams and the piercing glare of high-intensity floodlights marked the beginning of a maneuver that has not been seen in these waters since the height of the Cold War. As the sun began to crest the horizon, the Russian ensigns were lowered, and the fleet was diverted under armed escort toward the port of Gdynia. This was not simply a routine maritime inspection. It was the definitive seizure of the largest Russian cargo fleet in the Baltic Sea. According to Russian state media and the Kremlin's official press service, the seizure is being characterized as an act of blatant state piracy occurring within international shipping lanes. Russian officials claimed that the vessels were carrying essential humanitarian supplies, including food, medicine, and construction materials destined for the civilian population of Kaliningrad. Military spokesman in Moscow stated that the fleet was operating in full compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and that the U.S. intervention constitutes a direct violation of Russia's sovereign right to transit between its own territories. According to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this action represents a deliberate attempt to impose a total blockade on the Kaliningrad exclave, an act they suggest is a precursor to direct military aggression. The Kremlin maintained that the seizure was a calculated provocation designed to test Russia's red lines in the Baltic theater, framing the event as a strategic theft of state property worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But the story quickly became far more complicated. Before we break down the specific intelligence that led to this intercept and the legal mechanisms used to justify the seizure of sovereign Russian hulls, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the latest dramatic developments shaping global geopolitics. According to U.S. State Department officials and NATO's Maritime Command, the seizure was the culmination of a multi-month intelligence operation tracking the Northern Star cargo group. U.S. media reported that the vessels were not carrying humanitarian aid, but were instead functioning as a primary logistical artery for the Russian military, transporting dual-use microelectronics and advanced drone components sourced through third-party shell companies. To understand the legal basis for this action, analysts noted that the U.S. utilized the Proliferation Security Initiative, a global effort that allows for the interdiction of shipments suspected of carrying weapons of mass destruction or their delivery systems. Technical context provided by maritime experts suggests that the fleet had been engaging in dark shipping practices, frequently turning off their automatic identification systems, or AIS transponders, to mask their movements near sensitive NATO coastlines. By disabling these transponders, the vessels effectively became invisible to standard civilian tracking, a tactic commonly used to bypass international sanctions. U.S. authorities stated that the manifest was falsified at the point of origin, providing the legal, reasonable suspicion necessary for the boarding. Between these narratives lies a complex reality that analysts are still working to understand. What does the seizure of this specific fleet mean for the regional security architecture? The answer is found in the geography of the Baltic Sea and the unique status of Kaliningrad. Often referred to as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, Kaliningrad is a Russian exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania, serving as the headquarters for Russia's Baltic Fleet. Because it has no land connection to mainland Russia, the exclave is entirely dependent on maritime and rail corridors that pass through NATO-aligned territory. By seizing the 14 vessels of the Kolmogorov Group, the United States has effectively severed the most high-capacity logistical link between St. Petersburg and the Baltic exclave. This target matters because it forces the Kremlin to choose between depleting its remaining airbridge resources or allowing its military infrastructure in the region to degrade. Attacking the logistics of the Baltic Fleet carries strategic weight because it signals that the Suwalki Gap, the narrow strip of land connecting NATO allies, is no longer the only choke point in the region. The message was clear. The Baltic Sea is no longer a permissive environment for the clandestine movement of Russian military hardware. The ripples from this operation have triggered an escalation pyramid that is currently vibrating through every level of the international system. In the immediate military reaction, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed that S-400 missile batteries in Kaliningrad have been moved to an active targeting posture, while 2 Kilo-class submarines were detected departing their pens in the Gulf of Finland. Regional governments in Poland, Estonia, and Latvia have responded by declaring a state of heightened maritime alert, with Warsaw specifically moving mechanized units toward the border of the exclave to prevent any potential land-based retaliation. That spike in military readiness has consequences far beyond the immediate border. Global markets responded with predictable volatility as shipping insurance premiums for the Baltic region surged by 300% within 6 hours of the seizure. Commodity traders reported that Baltic freight rates climbed. Natural gas futures jumped. Energy costs surged. The Baltic Sea handles approximately 15% of global maritime trade, and the prospect of a kinetic naval standoff has forced major shipping conglomerates to reconsider their routes, potentially adding billions in logistical overhead to European industry. On the diplomatic front, the UN Security Council has called for an emergency session, though U.S. representatives have already indicated they will veto any resolution condemning the intercept, citing the right to enforce international non-proliferation treaties. Domestically, the political reaction in the United States has been sharply divided. Some members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee have praised the administration for restoring maritime deterrence, while others, including prominent media figures like Tucker Carlson, have expressed grave concern that the seizure constitutes an undeclared act of war. Critics argue that the move places the United States on a direct collision course with a nuclear-armed power over a cargo dispute that could have been handled through traditional sanctions. That internal political friction is mounting as the administration prepares to release a full manifest of the seized cargo to justify the operation to a skeptical public. Each layer of this consequence pyramid reveals a larger risk than the one before it. The Russian Federation maintains that the seizure of its cargo fleet is a criminal act of piracy that will be met with a symmetrical and devastating response. The United States maintains that the operation was a necessary law enforcement intervention to prevent the illicit flow of military technology into a conflict zone. This incident has effectively turned the Baltic Sea into a high-stakes laboratory for 21st century maritime interdiction. The fragility of the current peace is now centered on 14 ships sitting in a Polish harbor, serving as a physical manifestation of the broken trust between the East and the West. The conflict has moved from the trenches of Eastern Europe to the vital shipping arteries of the North, and the mechanisms of international law are being stretched to their absolute breaking point. The strategic balance of Northern Europe now rests on whether the Kremlin views this as a manageable economic loss or a terminal threat to its presence in the Baltic. With the Kaliningrad exclave now facing a potential logistical strangulation and NATO naval forces maintaining a blockade-like posture, the threshold for a wider regional war has never been lower. The geopolitical architecture of the region is being reshaped in real time. Yet the ultimate endgame for both Washington and Moscow remains obscured by the fog of this new maritime Cold War. Will this seizure remain an isolated incident, or is it the beginning of something far larger? Stay tuned for further updates as this situation continues to develop. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the latest dramatic developments shaping the world.